A little girl returned home after practicing with the children's choir for the Easter service. She proudly told her mother, "I learned a new hymn today. Christ has rhythm." Well, Jesus Christ has risen, and through Christ, God is offering you the opportunity to rise as well. The one who created you, the one who knew you before you were born, that God is calling you to new life that has been prepared for you. Jesus has burst out of the tomb and now invites you to come out of your tomb as well. A man had just laid the wreath of flowers on a friend's grave and noticed just a few rows over, there was an Asian man who was solemnly laying some rice on another grave. The man raised his voice saying, "When do you expect your friend to come and eat the rice?" The Asian man answered, "When your friend comes to smell the flowers." I'm talking about bursting out of the grave this morning. I'm talking about emptying out the graves in which we live too much of our lives, like we who have buried ourselves in our lives. You see, resurrection is not just the promise of life after death, but the assurance of the life-giving love of God that will always move away the stones holding us into our tombs. Tombs are just that. They're containers for the dead, and these days it feels like we're trapped in such claustrophobic spaces, dead places of greed and envy that fuel corruption and deception, places of ignorance that lead to violence, racism, and sexism, places of selfishness leading to poverty and waste. But God continues to roll the stone away. And when the stale air of our deadly decay meets God's energizing breath, new life is created. Hope and peace are born, and death truly is no more. So, now that Jesus' tomb is empty, it's time for us to do some spring cleaning of our own, to empty out our own tombs, to throw out the death-dealing powers of fear and hatred, denial and ignorance, so that the new life of God's loving justice can begin in us. Is there anybody who hasn't seen the video of the doctor being dragged off his United Airlines flight this last weekend? Not because he was a terrorist, not because he was on a watch list, not because he was belligerent or disruptive, but only because his name had been called and the flight was overbooked, and so he was being forcibly removed from the plane. And is there anybody here who didn't think that could have been me? Tired, aching for home, dragged down the aisle while all the other passengers looked on my bloody face with horror. For this terrible injustice, United CEO Oscar Munoz lamely apologized that United had to reaccommodate some passengers. He might as well have said, "We apologize for not apologizing because we have to reaccommodate our corporate lawyers who want us to avoid a lawsuit." I'm afraid Oscar Munoz sealed himself up in a crypt of denial. And it didn't take very long for him to stink up the joint. How about this Easter? If we opened up our own sealed tombs of denial and cleared out some of our own denial, whether that means lying to others about who we really are and what we've really done, or lying to ourselves about what's really going on and how we can make a difference in this world. Among the many issues that arose from this terrible event on the United Airlines flight, the overzealous security, the unfair system of overbooking and bumping, the botched corporate apologies, the out-of-touch management, was this question I had about the fellow passengers. I heard a lot of cries of protest as the man was being dragged out, and several folks thought to whip out their cell phones and start recording what was going on, but nobody did what Jesus surely would have done in that situation: offer to take the man's place. Here, take me, not him. Let him go home. I'll get off the plane. There was plenty of death to go around in that situation. Plenty of fear and arrogance, timidity and violence, denial and moral cowardice. Hans Küng, a great German theological scholar of the last generation, reported on a conversation he had with Rudolf Bultmann, a great German theological scholar of the previous generation, when he asked the famously skeptical Bultmann whether he felt that Christ lives because we believe in him. In other words, is Jesus Christ only alive because we remember him? That would mean that Easter is really the story of the church keeping Jesus alive by its memory of him and its preaching of his gospel. No, said Bultmann. Christ does not live because we believe in him. We believe in him because he lives. On Easter, we do not keep Christ alive. Christ keeps us alive. He opens up the tombs of our own making and banishes the forces of death in all the forms that we embrace them. Jealousy and fear, gone. Greed and envy, get out. Cowardice and narcissism, you're deplaning right now. In 1939, as World War II began in Europe, German pastor and theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer was teaching at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Bonhoeffer had resisted the Nazis for several years in Germany as one of the leaders of the Confessing Christ movement. But in 1939, he was a teacher in America. His academic reputation was flourishing. Then he made a sudden decision. He would return to Germany, to his people, to active resistance against the Nazis. This decision would lead Bonhoeffer onto a plane heading back home to Germany. It would ultimately lead him into a concentration camp, executed in the very last weeks of Hitler's reign. His friends opposed the decision at the time. Reinhold Niebuhr, a fellow teacher at Union, wrote this: "It was tempting for many here to regard him as in trouble psychologically, as depressed. It was tempting to recommend that he see a psychiatrist. Then he'd become more realistic." Dietrich Bonhoeffer didn't listen to his friends. He didn't take the easy way out. He didn't decide to hide from the forces of death by climbing into a tomb of denial, willful ignorance, and fear. No. He chose God's way rather than the easy way. And is there anyone here who does not believe that the Apostle Paul's words came true with Bonhoeffer? For if we have been united with him in a death like his, we will certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. Leading us out of our tombs, Christ keeps us alive. Just as our faith declares that God has done that for Bonhoeffer and for all the faithful. This is what resurrection can mean for us: a re-energized hope, a changed way of viewing what is most important, a changed and courageous new way of living. Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen was on a flight out of San Francisco, an empty seat separating her from an elegantly dressed older man in the window seat. She settled into reading a murder mystery as the flight took off, and later on in the flight, she heard a gasp of dismay from the man across the seat from her. Taking a discreet sideways look, she saw that the man had spilled a full container of yogurt onto the floor, and his right foot was covered with yogurt. The man was looking out the window the whole time, and he slowly drew back his right foot, kicking the yogurt under the seat and hiding the yogurt-stained shoe and foot. As he did so, Dr. Remen could see his left foot. His ankle was swollen. A metal brace emerged from the shoe. His left leg was paralyzed. When the stewardess passed by with the drink cart, Dr. Remen quietly asked her for a wet towel. and with a nod of her head indicating the spilled yogurt. There are 452 people on this plane, the stewardess snapped. I'm doing the best that I can. Dr. Remen writes, her defensiveness baffled me. We looked at each other in silence. Then I realized that it had simply not occurred to her that I was offering to help. If you bring me a wet towel, I'll be able to get that up, I said. The stewardess brought her the towel, and all the while the old man continued to stare out the airplane window. I used to love to fly, Dr. Remen said to him, but I find it difficult now. And she explained how in the last few years she had trouble seeing. Without turning his head, the man quietly told her that 8 months ago he had suffered a stroke and now had no feeling in either of his arms from his fingertips to his elbows. And since the stroke, he said, I am incontinent. I need to wear a diaper. Still, he couldn't meet her eye. I have an ileostomy, Dr. Remen said. Now he turned and looked at her. What's that? She explained that her large intestine had been surgically removed and she had to wear a plastic appliance attached to the side of her abdomen to collect her partially digested food. After a moment, they smiled at each other. Do you hear how gently Dr. Remen helped him empty out his tomb of shame, disappointment, and fear? Now he noticed the towel that she was holding. She looked down at his feet. May I? Kneeling, she began to wipe off his shoe. When I returned the towel to the galley, she writes, 2 flight attendants thanked me profusely, and when she left the plane at the end of the flight, the pilot stopped her. Thanks, he said, and pressed something into my hand. Halfway up the jetway, I looked at it. It was the little gift the airlines often give to children after a flight, a pin in the shape of a pair of wings. Reflecting back on this experience, she writes, the flight crew's surprised reaction to a simple act of kindness is chilling. Perhaps we are no longer a kind people. More and more, we seem to become numb to the suffering of others and ashamed of our own suffering. Sealed up. That's the way I describe it. Buried under. Encrypted with fear, shame, denial, loneliness, stress, and sorrow. But it does not have to be that way. The resurrection of Jesus Christ has made a new way possible, a way that can empty out the tombs in which we have buried ourselves. In the 1930s, there was a Christian missionary in Burma who had spent many, many years among the people there, telling them about the love of Jesus Christ and the power of the resurrection. The missionary developed a very serious disease, and it was known that he would die within the next year or so. His friends said that it was time for him to return home, to fly back to Great Britain so that he could say farewell to his friends and family. The missionary refused. He decided to remain in Burma among the Burmese Christians in the final months of his life. His friends asked him why. He explained, unless I die there, they will not believe that I love them. For the love of you, Jesus died here, among us, so that you and I could know for certain that God's love is for each and every one of us, that God's loving justice is intended for all of us here on earth. By the power of the resurrection, the tomb prepared for Jesus has been emptied, the very power of death broken, and new life brought to light on God's new day. So let us empty out our own tombs, the tombs of our own making, tombs of denial and ignorance, fear and cowardice, hatred and violence. Let us too walk into the light, the new life, the way of Jesus laid open for us all. Let our hope grow wings and our faith take flight. Let us soar on the updraft of love and fly in the jet stream of justice until together we have reached heaven's own skies. Amen.